one of our most treasured stories. It is about a man I first met more than 25 years ago when I was on the Today Show. His name is Robert Smithdas. And a while back, a magazine reporter asked me, of all the people I've interviewed, who had inspired me the most? He was surprised by my answer, I think, because it wasn't a president or a king or a movie star. It was Robert Smithdas. When Bob Smithdas, after all these years, heard of my reply, he wrote to me and said, "Please come back to see me. I'm married now. Meet my wife. See how we live." So now would you come back with me once again to meet the man I consider, for reasons you will understand, the most memorable interview of my life. For Bob and Michelle Smithdas, being guided to their usual pew, this is a weekly journey of faith to St. Peter's Church in Fort Washington, Long Island.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Michelle Smithdas can hear some of this service.
My goods, whatever material things I have, use them so that
But to Michelle's ears, the words are barely distinguishable. Bob cannot hear this music at all. He is completely deaf, but he can sense it in his fingertips through the vibrations in the pew. Neither Bob nor Michelle can see anything around them. They are not only deaf, they are totally blind. Bob and Michelle Smithdas defy their disabilities with every breath they take. Every day is a battle for normality. Bob and Michelle live in a world that is almost impossible for sighted hearing people to comprehend. Cooking dinner by touch. Bob and Michelle do that all the time. They live independently in their own home and manage their own chores. Imagine slicing onions in the dark, or not being able to see the flame on the stove. This is one of Bob's specialties, chicken cacciatore. He taught himself to cook, just as he had to teach himself how to talk.
I like to try my own recipe, and I think I am about the only deaf-blind person, or perhaps even hearing-blind person in this country who uses a pressure cooker.
Bob Smithdas has lived his life in a pressure cooker. He cannot hear his own voice, but he learned how to talk again after he became deaf and blind at the age of 4. He fought for an education at a time when deaf-blind was a synonym for dead end. Helen Keller had broken the mold early in this century. She became the first deaf-blind person to earn a college degree. In real life, and in this Hollywood version, she had to overcome both prejudice and frustration.
Now what? She wants to talk like you and me.
Helen Keller put a dent in the barriers, but it was Bob Smithdas, 50 years later, who became the next deaf-blind person to graduate from college. He was at the top of his class. Teachers called him brilliant. And Bob Smithdas didn't stop with college. He then earned a master's degree from New York University, the first graduate degree ever anywhere for a deaf-blind student. He has also received 2 honorary doctoral degrees. He has become a teacher, a poet, and a husband. I hadn't seen Bob Smithdas since 1967, until we met recently at the Helen Keller National Center on Long Island. Bob teaches there with his wife, Michelle. Hello, my friend.
Hello. It has been a long, long time. Would you let me introduce my wife, Michelle?
Thank you.
Hello there, Barbara. Glad to meet you.
There are 70,000 people in the United States who are both deaf and blind. But Bob is one of the tiny few with a special talent. He can read your words by putting his thumb on your lips and his fingers on your vocal cords. It's very difficult. So he generally relies on being able to communicate hand to hand with a manual alphabet. Since I couldn't do that, Two of the center's interpreters accompanied Bob and Michelle to relay my words to them. Michelle, how did you meet Bob?
In the hallway, I was walking very slowly. I was being careful. Here he was, walking. I did not see him, no, I did not even feel an emotion. Bang! Before I knew it, he cut me. That's how we met.
You literally banged into him.
Yes. So as they say, love by first sight, for us it was love by touch or by feeling.
Bob and Michelle, you have never actually seen each other. Bob, tell me what your wife looks like.
First of all, she is petite and rather delicate. She has delicate bone structure. When she is laughing, I realize she has a big smile. She has a very sweet disposition. I think that is what brought us together.
Michelle, you have never seen Bob. What do you think he looks like?
Well, to me, I think he looks handsome. I only have felt him in parts, so I had to piece it all together like a puzzle.
You see him by touching him.
Yes, maybe see one part of the face, and then maybe another part. So I just had to put it all together. Had a nice nose, too.
Touching is the way Bob and Michelle communicate. Just as the interpreters here are helping me talk with them, they fingerspell words letter by letter into each other's palms. You two talk all the time to each other, don't you?
Oh, yes, by finger spelling. They are asking if we talk to each other all the time. I said, oh, yes.
Let me ask you something. Many couples who see and hear will frown or make a face if they're mad. Michelle, how do you know when Bob is mad at you?
By the way he fingerspells. If he fingerspells too fast, I will know immediately that something must be the matter.
Fingerspelling was the key to Michelle's education, as it was for Bob. They both had sighted helpers to communicate classwork. Michelle earned a master's degree from Columbia University's Teachers College with 5 years of dedicated volunteer help from Linda Stillman. What did you do about textbooks, about lectures, about writing papers?
The lectures, I sat next to her, and I simply fingerspelled everything.
I mean, it's almost incomprehensible to me.
Well, you have an army of people to support you. I broke up the books into small chapters because this is work that has to be done immediately.
Every chapter was then put in Braille. Every textbook was put in Braille.
Every textbook. It's one course assigned 11 books one summer, and we did 11 books.
Okay, are you ready to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Michelle is now one of the blind leading the blind, teaching others to cope with the darkness in their own lives. There was a time when she could see. She was born sighted, but hard of hearing. By 16, she was totally deaf, unable to hear even her own voice. She heard others through sign language, but in her senior year of college, Michelle was severely injured in a snowmobile accident. As she explained recently to students at a nearby college, Michelle's recovery seemed to be going well, until one fateful Sunday afternoon, everything turned black.
All of a sudden, things went dark. Of course, the first thing I thought was the light bulb. The light bulb burned out. So I ran to the nearest light switch, and I flicked the light switch up and down. No light. Where was the window? I saw no light. Right then and there, I began to panic. I decided to call for help. Mom, Dad, where are you?
Michelle was blind. Her world was not only silent, it was now dark. Bob Smithdas would soon become the light of her life. Your parents did not want you to marry Bob.
Yes.
He was not just deaf and blind as you were, but 22 years older. How did you convince them?
I explained that I loved Bob and that we were able to get along and to communicate and stuff. Finally, they did agree. And we all have gotten along together. Bob and I have been married for almost 23 years. Good years.
23 good years. That's an accomplishment in any marriage. But how do they manage at home? How do they live day to day? What happens when the phone rings or the doorbell? What happens when they have guests? You will be surprised, and it will fill you with wonder.
We'll visit the comfortable home that Bob and Michelle share, with a little help from advanced technology, and see how Michelle was able to hear her husband's voice for the very first time. An exciting new chapter in a touching love story. When 2020 can...
You might think that a man who could not see or hear for almost his entire life, a man enclosed in silence and darkness, could not write powerful, beautiful poetry. But Bob Smithdas can and does. When he and Michelle were married, he wrote a special poem for the wedding. I've asked my colleague Bob Brown to read it for us.
There is no need to speak. I understand each quick, impulsive movement of your hand. By some strange magic of the heart, I guess the meaning of each gesture, each caress. Oh, when I reach to take you by the hand, it is because I need to understand that I am not alone in this broad land.
The home that Bob and Michelle decorated together is designed so that their sighted friends will be comfortable when they visit. Bob and Michelle don't need these lamps, obviously, but visitors do. And Bob selected the artwork himself.
I seem to have a knack of picking out interesting things.
How on earth when you can't see them?
You don't really have to see everything. You have to have a sense of symmetry, shape. Some things are graceful and they appeal to me.
Bob reads about 20 Braille magazines a month, ranging from The Economist to Popular Mechanics to Martha Stewart Living. Michelle complains that she's always tripping over his books and magazines.
I think he's probably one of the most brilliant men I know. Is more up to date on every subject than anybody I know. You can discuss the stock market, the opera.
Can you imagine if he'd had his sight and his hearing?
Yes, I don't know that he'd associate with many of us.
Bob and Michelle have visitors often, and there are occasional sighted helpers, but they lead remarkably self-sufficient lives. Technology is important. Their teletype-style phone accepts typewritten input from them and provides Braille output on this tactile sensitive board. Michelle's computer works the same way. They wear pages that vibrate differently for the telephone, for the doorbell, or even for a "Where are you?" message from another room. But no technological innovation has affected their lives as dramatically as the one 4 years ago that allowed Michelle to actually hear sounds. It is a procedure that can benefit only a small percentage of deaf people. As documented by public television's Nova, surgeons inserted electrodes into Michelle's inner ear where delicate cells had been irreparably damaged. The electrodes acted as surrogates for those cells, communicating some sound to the brain. After a month of healing, Michelle is ready to try her implant.
I hear something. Good.
Michelle is about to hear words for the first time in 25 years.
Can you hear
I did
me?
hear. She said you. I got you in there. Neat.
fine-tuning of the device took months, but Michelle is now able to distinguish many of the sounds around her and to understand some speech. There was one voice she was surprised to hear that first day.
And that insulting I said she was nice.
I heard her talking.
Good. That was your husband. Great voice, huh? Now you have to listen to that every day. Lucky you.
Before I got my implant, he would say, Michelle, Michelle, to call me, or he stamped. But now things are a little bit easier because he can now just call me, and usually I can hear him call me.
The lives of the deafblind have changed remarkably since the era of Helen Keller. She was never able to live by herself without sighted help, never able to be independent.
And today, it's a tremendous difference. We can communicate, we can cook, we can garden. It is a wonderful type of progress.
In spite of the good things, Bob, what is the hardest part of being deaf and blind? What is the most frustrating?
At this stage in life, I am very used to being deaf-blind, but I will admit that I miss not being able to see my friends' faces or hear their voices. Remember, deafness takes you away from sound, from music. Blindness takes you away from things, but deafness takes you away from people.
Michelle, do you ever say, why me? Or do you think this happened for a reason?
No, I do not question it. I should say that I am rather happy for what I am able to do and for what I have.
Bob and Michelle do not have sight, but they see their lives as we don't, full of opportunity rather than limits. Bob's poetry says it best.
I praise my God, for he has guided me through the darkness too intense to find the day. I praise my God, for he provided me with music when all sound had died away. Into the songless darkness of my days, the light of hope and song of love have crept, until my spirit sings this hymn of praise to him who woke me when my whole life slept.
What a couple. What we didn't show you is the Smithdas workday. They and their colleagues at the Helen Keller National Center on Long Island teach other deaf and blind people how to cook over a hot stove, how to crack open an egg and save the yolk, how to do office work and computers. In short, Hugh, how to live independent and good lives.
Well, they have a lot to teach all of us, I think, about living. Beautiful. We'll be right back.
Watch the